Hi, I'm Elaine Engelhardt from Utah Valley State. Welcome to class today. The class is Ethics and Values, and we're now moving into our section on sexual reproduction and sexual morality. These class periods can be explicit and are not meant for young children. They're meant for 18 and older adults, and so I would recommend that you either watch these with your children or not allow your children to watch them at all. I'd also like to give a disclaimer on these class periods, which is they're not necessarily, the views expressed in them are not necessarily my opinion or those of Utah Valley State or those of the students or guests on the program. But for us it is very important that we look at a wide variety of issues in an ethics and values class. And in looking at a wide variety of issues, we become a well-educated populace. We become people who understand different sides to issues and strengthen our own positions. And so in that light, we will be discussing some very sensitive issues and trying to understand the points that these authors are making. Today we start off with a very classic piece by Judith Jarvis Thomson that was written in 1971. And helping me today with this issue is Dr. Phil Gordon. Thanks for being with us, Phil.
Thank you for inviting me.
And Phil, we have some students who are helping us out today. Over here we have Lloyd and John. And on this side we've got Cassie and Rhonda. So welcome to you students. And Phil, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, about your background?
Sure. I did my PhD in communication at the University of Illinois. Did some research and teaching in Alaska for a few years before I joined the faculty here at UVSC in 1999. And I'm interested in cultural studies and media criticism, and I'm particularly interested in the way in which through popular culture we tell ourselves stories about ourselves and use the media to interpret our worlds and our place in it.
Thank you. And you've been the department chair of communication for quite a while, and in 2006 even got through the 4-year degree in communication.
That was a great moment.
Yes, I'm sure you're getting a lot of student majors in that area.
Yeah, we
and how do you like being a transplant to Utah?
Oh, I love Utah, and I've had a great experience here. I didn't know anything about the place, but I sure had a good experience when I came and interviewed, and you were the chair of the search committee, and you took me up to Sundance, and I walked around there. I said, well, this place is for me.
Oh, good. You and your bike decided it was
right.
The place.
Exactly.
Well, I'm glad you decided to stay here with us. You've made a nice difference.
Thank you.
And this is a controversial article, but very interesting. Tell me your thoughts on it as you've read it and looked over it.
Well, you know, my first thought was that I really enjoyed it, and right away I was struck by the power of her approach. I mean, here we are moving into the most controversial issue that our society seems to face, and she has this philosophical method of saying, you know what, let's set aside emotions and just use logic to try to analyze what are our premises here and what is it that we're talking about. And then she also used a series of very clever, what you would call arguments by analogy. And I think that the combination of those two things, her sort of unemotional logical approach and the arguments by analogy, really allow you to do a high level of kind of critical analysis in what I would call a very civil way. You know, her humorous examples kind of distanced it from the emotional baggage and gave you room to analyze it rationally.
Thank you. And with Judith Jarvis Thomson, she's from MIT, and she really is looking at a very controversial issue because this is 1971, and Roe versus Wade does not come around until 1973. So when she's writing this, abortion is illegal. Doesn't become legal for a couple more years. And so she's starting to look at what are ways in which it could be reasonably expected that a woman could go about with the termination of an unwanted pregnancy.
Right.
So I like the way that you've kind of led up on this, so let's go ahead and look at the first graphic. And Lloyd, would you read this for us, please?
Sure. Argument against abortion, missing important step. Opponents of abortion commonly spend most of their time establishing that the fetus is a person and hardly any time explaining the step from there to the impermissibility of abortion. I suggest that the step they take is neither easy nor obvious, that it calls for a closer examination than is commonly given.
Okay, so this, she says, is not easy. It's not an easy step, and she said it takes closer examination. Tell us a little bit more about this, Lloyd.
Well, what she's saying is a lot of times the abortion debate happens around whether or not a fetus, especially at the earlier stages after conception, is a person or not. And she's saying, look, that is a good discussion, but even let's grant that it is a person from the beginning, and what are the logical steps? What are the arguments after that point? Because we still need to establish those as well.
Okay, and she does trick us in the end of this, but in the beginning she says, you know, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to grant you this. John, would you read this next graphic for us, please?
Yes. Right to life argument. I propose then that we grant that the fetus is a person from the moment of conception. How does the argument go from there? Something like this, I take it. Every person has a right to life, so the fetus has a right to life. No doubt the mother has a right to decide what shall happen in and to her body. Everyone would grant that.
Okay, is this a difficult concept then, Phil?
Yeah, it really shows I think she's making it very complex, because if it was just a matter of the fetus having a right to life, then there would be no issue. But the question is, what happens when the rights of one person impinge upon the rights of another person? I think that's the complexity of the issue. And is it only a cut and dry thing, or is it more complicated than that?
Okay, and we're going to see how complicated it gets. Any questions or comments from the students? Okay, Cassie, would you read the next graphic for us, please?
Sure. Violinist analogy. You wake up in the morning and you find yourself back to back in bed with an unconscious violinist, a famous unconscious violinist. He has been found to have a fatal kidney ailment, and the Society of Music Lovers has canvassed all the available medical records and found that you alone have the right blood type to help.
And continue.
They have therefore kidnapped you, and last night the violinist's circulatory system was plugged into yours, so that your kidneys can be used to extract poisons from his blood as well as your own. The director of the hospital now tells you, look, we're sorry the Society of Music Lovers did this to you. We would never have permitted it if we had known. But still, they did it, and the violinist now is plugged into you. To unplug you would be to kill him. But never mind, it's only for 9 months. By then he will have recovered from his ailment and can safely be unplugged from you.
Okay, and you say, yeah, but I don't want this. And the hospital director says, hey, well, you know, tough luck. All persons are humans, and all persons have a right to life, and violinists are persons, so therefore you must keep this violinist plugged in. Tell us a little bit about this argument, Cassie.
It just sounded, when I first read it, it sounded really funny and ridiculous. You have an unconscious violinist, but I think, like we had kind of talked about earlier before class started, it's a good way for it to relate to all persons, not necessarily just women, but the fact that it kind of is a logical approach to it. And
that this could happen to a man.
Right.
It's not necessarily a woman who wakes up with a famous violinist. That it could be Phil or
Right.
Lloyd or John who wake up with this famous violinist. And hey, tough luck, it was you, but and you didn't know about it and we didn't ask you, but we figured you probably wouldn't let us anyway. And this music might get old after a week.
so if I understand correctly, then this is a case of rape or incest or something like that, right?
Sure. This is a case where you didn't ask for it. Phil?
Yeah, I mean, that to me is the power of this analogy, and the question of is abortion permissible, and the idea that there might be a spectrum of permissibility. And she says, well, let's look at the most extreme case. What about in the case of rape? Because oftentimes with abortion, in the anti-abortion argument says, well, you know what, if you didn't want to have that child, you shouldn't have engaged in a practice in which you consciously realized that there would be a risk in which you would become pregnant. And so if you do that, then you're responsible for your actions and you shouldn't get an abortion. But what about the case of rape? And so in order to think about rape, she said, let's imagine this scenario. And like you said, even a man or woman could think of this. What if you just woke up one morning and suddenly this other being was attached to you and you didn't do anything? You know, you've actually been victimized in this case, and yet, if you unplug this guy, he's going to die. So now suddenly you've become responsible for his life, but at the same time, he's creating a terrible burden on your life. And suddenly you realize, there's some moral complexity there. What would you do?
Okay, very good. And in fact, she's really pulling people, at this time in 71, she's pulling people by the lapels and saying, look at this argument.
Right.
And some people want to say, oh, this is too silly, this is too flip. But tell us about this argument, Rhonda.
Well, it's a pretty logical argument that you wouldn't typically think of, but in cases of rape, it's really hard to explain that kind of terror that goes through a woman that I don't know that anyone, not even women, would understand unless it happened to them.
Okay, very good. And any comments over here, Lloyd?
Yeah, as I was reading this, it's kind of funny because it, in a lot of ways, instead of making the argument of abortion's right or wrong, it kind of forces that dilemma on someone and making it point out this is a big thing. Because if I had a violence attached to me, as much as it sucked, I'd probably say, well, I'm not going to kill this guy, so I'm just going to have to deal with it. And so in a lot of ways, you could say, well, this is an argument against abortion if we're going to take for granted that this fetus is a person. But either way, it brings forth that this is a real dilemma. It's something that you really have to think about, and it's not just something you can just quickly make a decision here or there with. Yeah,
well, and it's not a quick decision at all. And you say, gee, I'm never going to have to make that decision either. So it's a tough one. John.
It sets up the real difficulty of the situation for women that are in a case like this, where it's not just some arbitrary decision. It really is a decision to end a life if they believe that the fetus is a person, and it really does set up the difficulty of that kind of decision.
Okay, thank you.
I might add too that on college campuses, all across the United States, and I'm sure worldwide, that the cases of rape and probably pregnancy happen more often than any of us are aware of.
I think so too. I think so, whether it be date rape or even a stranger rape. And certainly, as we've mentioned before, this topic is a great Civil War debate in this country, and it's been going on for many years before Roe versus Wade and has continued on since Roe versus Wade. And at the filming of this episode, Roe versus Wade is still the law, but certainly we don't know what changes can be made as new Supreme Court justices are added and old ones either retire or pass on. So it is a very difficult area. Well, let's go ahead and pull up these next graphics because, Cassie, you're exactly right. This is an analogy of rape. And would you read this for us, Rhonda?
Yeah, and under the cases of rape, is it morally incumbent on you to accede to the situation? No doubt it would be very nice of you if you did a great kindness, but do you have to accede to it? What if it were not 9 months, but 9 years, or longer still?
Okay, Phil, tell me about those questions. So now she moves it. What if it just wasn't 9 months? What if it's 9 years? And now is this going to be easy for Lloyd to say, well, I don't like it. It's a bad setup for 9 months, but now 9 years.
Yeah, and I think that she's examining, is there a principle involved here? Is it an absolute right versus an absolute wrong? Or is it instead a very complicated situation? I mean, Lloyd kind of flippantly said, well, I guess if I woke up and this violinist was attached to me and his life was dependent on me, well, I'm a good guy, I'd say okay. But I'm not so sure that he would say okay. And I mean, I'll point out right now that think about all the people that are on kidney donor lists. There's a lot of people out there that need kidneys. You got 2 kidneys, go give them one. But of course, it would be very nice of you, but is there a moral imperative? Is it on your shoulders that you must do it? Should there be a law that says if you could donate a kidney to somebody, you ought to be able to be made to do it? And you would say no, because that interferes with my right of self-determination and my right to have a life.
Okay, thank you. Lloyd, he's going to jump right in. Can you do it for 9 years, Lloyd?
Well, that's what I think the big point she points out in that last quote. She says, but do you have to accede to it? And there's a big difference if I was to choose, okay, yeah, I want to do this. And there's another thing if someone said, you have to do this. And there's a huge difference there. And And if someone said I had to, then in a lot of ways that'd give me even more reason to not want to. And so, it points out that is a lot of ways needs, I think, what she's going to go down with is it needs to be a personal decision and can't be forced. That decision can't be forced on someone else.
Okay, and she even goes so far as to say, so what if this pregnancy went on for 9 years? What if it went on for the entire life? And this was nothing that you asked for, nothing at all. Okay, let's go ahead and look at the next graphic. And Rhonda, would you read this for us as well?
Suppose you find yourself trapped in a tiny house with a growing child. I mean a very tiny house and a rapidly growing child. You are already up against the wall of the house, and in a few minutes you'll be crushed to death. However innocent the child may be, you do not have to wait passively while it crushes you to death.
It's like an Alice in Wonderland.
You've got an Alice in Wonderland situation going here. And what's going on with this analogy then, Rhonda?
Well, anyone who's had a child or who's been pregnant knows that the space is extremely tiny, and you do feel like you're being crushed in some point. You don't feel yourself. There's a, if you're in a good position of being pregnant, it's a wonderful thing, an absolutely blessed event. But if it's a difficult, which, has happened in my life, personally, it was a very difficult event to get through.
Okay, and so you're being crushed to death. And this child just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and suddenly it comes down to my life or the child's life. Phil, what's going on here with this analogy then?
Well, it's so interesting what she's done here with this essay, because she's started out and she's gone to the two most difficult cases where there's the most, I would say, amount of moral ambiguity. The first one with the violinist was an analogy for what if you get raped?
Or even incest.
Right. And the second one is an analogy for what if the life of the mother is put in danger, right? So again, it's a very clear sort of situation where the rights of the fetus are in contradiction to the rights of the mother, and the question is there some moral ambiguity here? Is there complexity here? And most people, certainly in Utah, claim the right to self-defense. If somebody's going to kill you, then you have the right to kill them back first, And so again, it's that question of, is there an absolute principle? And she's suggesting, well, a really nice person might sacrifice their life for this other person, but you don't have to be that nice according to our moral universe that most of us live with.
Okay, thank you. And so let's put one of the men over here on the hot seat and say that John, it's your life or the life of the child, and you've already got a child that you're supporting. What are you going to do at this point? So is the fetus going to be more important than your life and the life that you have with your family now, or is your life going to come first?
My life is going to come first.
Okay.
And I think that part of that has to do with the responsibility I do have to the other people in my life and so on, that this is one person that may be removed from my life, but me being removed from 3 or 4 other people's lives, that's a different situation, so you kind of have to weigh it. But
And Lloyd, as Rhonda was talking about this, she's letting you know that she's already bonded with this child. She wanted this baby, she likes this baby, but it's going to either take her life, or it's going to either it's going to live, or she's
one of us.
Oh, yeah, that's what I was trying to get at. Only one of you is going to be around. So, how does Thomson help us with this?
Well,
and self-defense is
yeah, I think
good.
self-defense is good. And I think the biggest thing is that she really brings out that these aren't easy decisions.
Right.
And when they're not easy decisions, like I said before, it's one thing to make a decision for yourself. It's another thing to tell someone else how they need to make these kind of decisions.
Very good. And so this is going to be more of a family decision for you, isn't it? It's going to be something, John, where you're going to be doing a lot of soul searching and whatever you do in the process of soul searching with your family. And the same thing would be true with the violinist, joining your family.
And no one else is really going to know what I've gone through.
No.
And so it would be hard for them to judge. And like Lloyd's saying, I mean, if it's hard for them to judge, it's hard for them to tell you what you should and shouldn't do.
Very good. Yeah.
Actually, I was going to echo basically what John said, is the fact that none of us knows what our thoughts will be, what our feelings will be, until we're at that point. And it's not going to be an easy decision, I don't think.
Right. No, it's not that you're some monster that says, oh, this child has become an inconvenience and I don't want to carry it around anymore. No, you're very much bonded to this, but only one of you is going to live. Any other thoughts on this, Phil?
No.
Okay, well, we've got 3 good graphics on self-defense. And Lloyd, would you read these for us, please?
Yeah. Limits to the right of self-defense. I'm not claiming that people have a right to do anything, whatever, to save their lives. I think rather that there are drastic limits to the right of self-defense. If someone threatens you with death, unless you torture someone else to death, I think you have the right, even to save your life, to do so. But the case under consideration here is very different. In our case, there are only 2 people involved whose own life is threatened, and one who threatens it. Both are innocent. The one who is threatened is not threatened because of any fault, and the one who threatens does not threaten because of any fault. For this reason, we may feel that bystanders cannot intervene, but the person threatened can. In sum, a woman surely can defend her life against a threat to it posed by the unborn child, even if doing so involves its death.
Okay, thank you. And so she's saying right now that third parties are making these very personal choices. Phil, what about this notion? So John brings up, this is a family decision. This is something that is very personal between me, my family, and perhaps even his God.
Yeah, I actually think that this is an analogy that addresses the question of the morality of the doctor, and whether a doctor has the right to perform an abortion because a woman asked him to, right? Can the third party intervene or not? That's what that means, I think. You know, if someone's threatening your life and you ask me for help, can I come help you defend yourself? And so I think that that's what that's about. And again, it's this rhetorical strategy that she uses where she says, okay, because abortion is so emotional, it gets us so tight that I think it becomes hard to think rationally about it. So she says, well, let's examine how the principles would play out in a different sort of situation, but with a similar set of forces going on, right? And it's because people were arguing, you know, should doctors be held liable, or should it be illegal for them to perform an abortion? And of course, the underlying point is a woman cannot do the abortion by herself. She needs a third party to help her. I think that's what this is about.
I think it is. It's also about legislating morality. Other people telling this doctor, if you do it, we're going to put you in jail, because this is still illegal at this point.
Right.
So women are having the backstreet abortions, unsafe situations, and so I think that it's two-sided. Can the doctor come in and help me with my self-defense? And who's keeping the doctor away? Rhonda?
You said it.
Okay. Any other comments on this point? Very well done. Thank you, Phil. Appreciate that. Well, then let's move on to our next analogy. She has some amazing analogies that she's written in here. In fact, that's why quite often when we're in a philosophy class and an ethics class looking at these issues, we're looking at classic cases, pieces that have withstood the test of time, and that's what we have here with Judith Jarvis Thomson's piece. It's withstood the test of time because she's saying, this is what it would be like to be raped, to be a victim of incest. This is what it would be like to know that the child is killing you, and what are you going to do, either as a father or a mother in this case. Rhonda, did you have a comment? Okay. Well, then we'll have you read the next graphic for us.
Third-party involvement.
Yes.
A third party who says, I cannot choose between you, is fooling himself if he thinks this is impartiality. If Jones is found and fastened on a certain coat, which he needs to keep him from freezing, but which Smith also needs to keep from freezing, then it is not impartiality that says, I cannot choose between you, when Smith owns the coat.
And continue on, please.
Women have said again and again, this is my body, and they have reason to feel angry, reason to feel that it has been like a shouting in the wind. Smith, after all, is hardly likely to bless us if we say to him, "Of course it's your coat," and anybody would grant that it is. But no one may choose between you and Jones, who is to have it.
Okay, this Smith and Jones analogy is just wonderful. Do you want to tell us a little bit about it, Lloyd?
Yeah, basically with the Smith and Jones is you have one coat and you have two people who are really cold, and one of them's, the coat's not going to fit on two people, so whoever's wearing it's going to live, whoever's not wearing it's going to die.
And we'd love to change this analogy to say that the two of you could wrap up in it, but you can't.
You can't. It doesn't.
She says only one
So
coat.
this is the analogy, and one is, it belongs to one person, doesn't belong to the other. So who has the right to say, well, that person has to give the coat away to save the other person, and that other person dies?
Okay, thank you. John, why is this such a difficult analogy? Maybe you've been out on the desert with a friend and you guys have really been very, very cold and or stuck somewhere and wondered if you were both going to make it out of the desert alive.
Yeah, I don't think that the person that has the coat, they don't want that other person to freeze to death. They don't want to keep the coat for themselves and hand it and survive. They want both people to survive, I think, and that is really complex because the person with the coat still has some kind of feeling for the other person that might die as a result of not having the coat.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Thank you. So, and the interesting thing about this then is that it's Jones' coat, Smith has it. Now we need somebody to help Jones get it back even, so that Jones can live. So once again, we're back into the analogy of a third party. Whether it's a third party that gives a law that says you can have a safe abortion, or if it's a doctor saying that you have a right to a safe abortion. But somebody needs some help. What would you like to add to that, Phil?
Well, I would just say, she's going after the big ones. First she went, what about in the case of rape? Then she went, what about in the case of the well-being or health or life of the mother? And now she's saying, what about this thing that you always hear the abortion, the pro-choice camp say, which is that women have a right to control their own body. Nobody can tell them differently. It's sort of, okay, both, it's an analogy trying to say, well, both these people have a right to life, Jones and Smith, or the mother and the fetus, but they also both have the right to control their own bodies in the way that Smith and Jones, you have to think about not only the morality of right to life, but what we call right to property. And so, the owner of the coat has two rights going on, the right to own his coat and the right to live. And so in that sense, in the case of Smith and Jones anyway, we would say that the two rights of Smith trumps the one right of Jones.
Very good. Very, very well done. Rhonda or Cassie, any comments on this?
I think we're entering, into these next analogies, the more weightier, the harder to deal with issues. These all make sense so far.
Yes, they do. Well, let's turn to page 90, first column, and we're about 3/4 of the way down, and she's going to talk just a little bit more on this about Smith and Jones, and she says, thus justice might call for somebody to get Smith's coat back from Jones, and yet have a right to refuse to be the one to lay hands on Jones, a right to refuse to do the physical violence to him. Lloyd, can you continue reading there?
Yeah, this, I think, must be granted, but then what should be said is not, no one may choose, but only I cannot choose, and indeed not even this, but I will not act. Leaving it open that somebody else can or should, and in particular that anyone in a position of authority with the job of securing people's rights both can and should. So this is no difficulty. I've not been arguing that any given third party must accede to the mother's request that he perform an abortion to save her life, but only that he may.
Okay, thank you. So Phil just backs up your points then that you're making there. So we've added to the notion of the house and the child that's outgrowing the house. Now we've gone with the coat analogy. So the right to self-defense, the right to your own life, and the right to your own property. And now the right to be able to ask someone to help you defend your own property.
Right, right.
Okay.
I was just thinking about the legal system itself. You know, if someone steals something for us, we are not to take things into our own hands.
Okay.
You know, the court says, don't. Let the courts decide. Let the police officers come in. Let the judge, you know, handle this. You know, in our system of law, we are not to intercede on our own behalf.
Yeah,
which is,
and that's the rub, because in the
That is the
meantime,
rub.
then Jones is going to freeze to death.
Well, but it's also the question of, all right, so someone steals your coat and you call the police, and the police go to arrest the guy, and then they say, well, you know what? He needs the coat more than you, so we're not going to arrest him. And I think that this is the issue of who gets to decide, and does a doctor need to do what a woman is requesting him to do? I mean, this is the moment where it becomes more difficult, I think.
Absolutely.
You know, she started out with the easy ones, well, rape and the life of the mother, but now it's become more about, well, what if she just doesn't want to be pregnant? And it's not necessarily that she was raped or that her life is in danger, but just on the principle that it's my coat, it's my body, and I don't want to give it to this person right now.
and this is the harder one.
Right, it's the harder one, and it's also then becomes more difficult or complex with regard to the morality of the physician, just like the morality of the police officer at that point.
Okay, so let's go ahead and pull up the next points. And Cassie, would you read these for us?
Abortion for other reasons. Where the mother's life is not at stake, the argument I mentioned at the outset seems to have a much stronger pull. Everyone has a right to life, so the unborn person has a right to life. And isn't the child's right to life weightier than anything other than the mother's own right to life, which she might put forward as ground for an abortion?
Okay, and the next one?
For we should now, at long last, ask what it comes to have a right to life. In some views, having a right to life includes having a right to be given at least the bare minimum one needs for continued life. But suppose that what in fact is the bare minimum a man needs for continued life is something he has no right at all to be given.
Okay, thank you. So we're looking at this now, this notion of right to life. And Phil, why is this such a tough question? Why is this a question that just doesn't go away?
Well, for one thing, I think that what she was referring to in the passage is that's not a self-evident what that means, what right to life means. And she brings up what one sense of right to life is, that a person, once they're alive, has the right to the bare minimum that they need to live. And you know, the fact is, in our society, we don't act that way, really.
No.
We don't. I mean, what do people need to live? Food, clothing, and shelter. We don't just give that to everyone just because they're alive. We have a morality in our culture that says, you know, individual responsibility and that sort of thing, and you're supposed to provide for yourself, and it's good if you could help others. So we actually already have a limited right to life at the get-go. So I think that was what that was about.
I think so too. Any other thoughts or points on this? Okay, well then let's continue on with the next graphic. And John, would you read this for us, please?
Yes. Consensual relations pregnancy argument. Suppose a woman voluntarily indulges in intercourse, knowing of the chance it will issue in pregnancy, and then she does become pregnant. Is she not in part responsible for the presence, in fact the very existence, of the unborn person inside her?
Okay, and next?
No doubt she did not invite it in, but doesn't her partial responsibility for its being there itself give it a right to the use of her body?
Okay, and then she moves on into an analogy about the burglar coming in the window. So let's go ahead and have Lloyd read for us about the burglar coming in the window.
All right.
And it's the next graphic, Lloyd.
If the room is stuffy, and I therefore open a window to air it, and a burglar climbs in, it would be absurd to say, now you can say she has given him a right to the use of her house, for she is partially responsible for his presence there, having voluntarily done what enabled him to get in, in full knowledge that there are such things as burglars, and that burglars burgle. It remains equally absurd if we imagine it is not a burglar who climbs in, but an innocent person who blunders or falls in.
Okay, thank you. So tell us a little bit about this analogy, Lloyd. What's going on here with
I have
this?
a problem with this analogy. And the reason I have a problem with this analogy is is if I were to open up my window, there's a difference between happen to be someone coming in, or me going to open my window, seeing a burglar standing outside my window, opening it up, and then walking away. And with that full knowledge, I mean, with pregnancy, with sex, I mean, there's that connection between sex and getting pregnant is a lot stronger than the relationship between opening your window and letting a burglar in. But then again, and so I have a problem with that, but she still has, I think, a somewhat of a point when she says that you've given the right to that burglar. And I think she does make a good point there, but I think the analogy is a little weak because the links between those two things aren't the same.
Okay, and she is using this word burgle. Tell me a little bit more about why you don't like it, and then let's see how she tries to toughen up this argument.
Well, I just think it sounds harsh to say this in terms of getting pregnant, but in terms of opening your window and, you know, when there's a burglar, it just seems like common sense. If you leave your doors unlocked, you're asking, you know, and you have valuables inside, you're almost asking for, you know, asking to get burglared. But that sounds really harsh to say in terms of getting pregnant and things, but it just seems like common sense and just being responsible and smart. But
okay, thank you. And Rhonda?
Well, at this point, I think that there has to be responsibility on people in today's age know what causes pregnancy. And it's not just the woman's responsibility. And yet, you know, when two people engage in intercourse, if there isn't something that's helping to prevent becoming pregnant, then yeah, you're going to be burgled.
Okay, so it's a biological fact. Anytime you have unprotected sexual intercourse, you can become pregnant.
And I think it's irresponsible to invite a life, because that's exactly what it is.
But now she's going to say, well, okay, I didn't invite this. I was on birth control. I had screens on my window. You know, I didn't just open it up and ask the fresh air to come in. I had screens, and I even put bars on.
Sure, I got pregnant that way once.
and this burglar still got in. So Phil, what do you do when you get burgled? You were on birth control. I mean, you were doing everything you could, and man, this is a very unwanted pregnancy besides.
Yeah. Again, they're clever analogies, and never before have I read an article on abortion that made me chuckle so much.
Yeah, because it is so clever.
Yeah, and again, she's exploring that spectrum of permissibility of abortion. And clearly her position on the one end of the spectrum was very strong under certain circumstances, you know, life of the mother, rape, that sort of thing, that, you know, you got to give some room there. But she says now she's looking at this issue, and again it gets to this argument of, well, if they didn't want to get pregnant, they shouldn't have had sex. And, you know, to play the devil's advocate, yeah, I didn't want to get burgled, I just wanted to cool off the house, so I had to open the window. I didn't want to get pregnant, I just wanted to have sex, and the pregnancy happened. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
there's a natural I mean, like physical, biological.
Exactly.
That's kind of what.
And I hear that actually a lot today.
Yeah, but it's a similar sort of a thing. It's kind of a crapshoot. You know, maybe you're going to get burgled, maybe you're going to get pregnant, but it wasn't your intent. And then she moved a little backwards, back to the spectrum. She says, okay, forget about that. What if you did have burglar bars up, right? What if you did have
your screens
control?
on?
So it's not really your fault anymore. You were doing everything you could to not get pregnant. And you know what? You're in your house. I got to breathe. It was so hot in my house that I couldn't breathe. I had to open the window. Well, you know what? I was in my body. I was so aroused. I had to do something.
Okay.
I'm just saying that's the analogy.
Okay. Well, it is. You might be blushing. Maybe not. Okay. And so now she's going to say, what in the case of birth control failure?
Right.
You've done everything possible. This is a very poor timing for a pregnancy. You've already got 5 kids. This is the 6th one. You can't support it. You don't have insurance. you know, she's not going to give you all the reasons here, but she was going to say, you know, you're, and let's even say, you know, you're a couple, you're married even, and it's not well, she calls them seed people in your carpet even. She has some great analogies. They got in through the tiniest of screen even, she says. And still you're pregnant. So you were responsible. What do you do, John?
I think that's a hard question. I mean, we can sit here and we can attack the analogy as being weak, but at the same time, I think her initial question stands. Just because the woman did get pregnant, does she necessarily have a responsibility? And that question stands, and I think that we need to keep that in mind.
Okay. It stands, and now it's up to, hey, the guy gets to walk away, you know, the burglar gets to walk away. but the woman.
Well, the burglar is the fetus.
Yeah, oh, that's right,
Yeah.
Sorry. But the man in this situation is going to get to walk away, and she now, the woman, will now have this accident, so to speak.
And I'll make one more point. If I had a house and it had a big hole in the front room, and I had a party and I invited everybody in, but I didn't tell them about the hole.
Like this.
Yeah, I know. I did used to have a house like this. But I had a party there once, now that I think about it. But if somebody falls in the hole and gets hurt, our law says you're responsible
Oh, yeah.
for that. Yeah,
Oh,
you
yeah.
have a degree of responsibility.
I mean, actually, to be fair about Phil's house, he had stairs. I mean, so it was like you came in the living room and you could go downstairs. But
Sunken living
But there
room.
was a period where I got rid of those stairs.
yeah,
And there was just a hole.
yeah, the stairs are no longer there
Yeah.
because you don't want it. It was an accident waiting to happen.
Did
Exactly.
anyone have an accident?
No.
Oh, yeah, but I've had friends where they could be on 3 forms of birth control and still get pregnant. I mean,
I used to say that if I drank the water, you know, that would
yeah,
happen.
truly. I mean, I truly had a friend who'd had her tubes tied and still got pregnant. Yeah, so it's things happen.
My
you
friend
know.
used to call women like that fertile myrtles.
Yeah. So now she's going to move into an analogy based on the Good Samaritan. And let's go ahead and read a little bit about the Good Samaritan. In fact, let's read it from the book on page 93. And Cassie, bottom of page 93, second column. And it starts out, a certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves, which stripped him of his raiment and wounded him and departed, leaving him half dead.
Okay.
Next page, do you want to keep reading?
Yeah. And by chance there came down a certain priest that way, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. And likewise the Levite, when he was at the place, came and looked on him, and passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him, and went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring in oil and wine, and set him on his own beast, and brought him to an inn, and took care of him. And on the morrow, when he departed, he took out 2 pence, and gave them to the host, and said unto him, Take care of him, and whatsoever thou spendest more, when I come again, I will repay thee.
Okay, thank you. So where does this analogy fit in then, Cassie, about the minimally decent Samaritan and the Good Samaritan?
I think the point she's trying to make is that the Good Samaritan went beyond what he needed to do at all, beyond what was necessary, and just was really, really went out of his way. And
Okay.
that is not necessary. Maybe it's only necessary to, I don't know what is necessary in the case of the Good Samaritan, but it's not necessary to be that good and
Okay.
do that much.
Okay, and so what would a minimally decent Samaritan do in these reproductive situations, Lloyd?
A minimally,
And you can say according to Thomson, Judith Jarvis Thomson.
I think the minimally decent Samaritan would, well, we have to look at the Good Samaritan went way out of the way to take care of this person. And I think the minimally decent Samaritan would at least acknowledge and give the very bare help so the person can at least get off the ground and stumble over to the next hole to fall in and have someone else help them out.
Okay, thank you. And in fact brings up the case of Kitty Genovese, who is being raped and murdered in a parking lot in New York. All her neighbors can hear the screams and watch, and no one comes down and helps her, which would be what perhaps a good Samaritan would do.
No one meaning 38 people.
No one, meaning the 38 people, will come down and help her, try to fend off this person who's attacking her, and no one is a minimally decent Samaritan with her. No one even calls the police, which would be seen as a minimally decent Samaritan activity. Well, let's pull up the next graphic and see where Thomson is going with this analogy then of the Good Samaritan. Rhonda, would you read this for us, please?
The Good Samaritan went out of his way at some cost to himself to help one in need of it. We are not told what the options were, that is, whether or not the priest and the Levite could have helped by doing less than the Good Samaritan did. But assuming they could have, then the fact that they did nothing at all shows that they were not even minimally decent Samaritans, because they were not even minimally decent.
Okay, and continue.
It is worth drawing attention to the fact that in no state in this country is any man compelled by law to be even a minimally decent Samaritan to any person. By contrast, in most states in this country, women are compelled by law to be not merely minimally decent Samaritans, but good Samaritans to unborn persons inside them.
Okay, thank you. So people are being asked to be good Samaritans. And Phil, where is she moving along with this point then?
I think that the point of this is she's saying, you know, if someone's pregnant and they don't want to have the baby, if they're a good Samaritan, they'll have that baby anyway. But the law as it existed in 1971 said they took away her choice of whether she's going to be a good Samaritan or not. They're going to say, you have to be a good Samaritan. And so I think that she's raising the question of, you know, do we legislate morality? Do we make it illegal to not be the very best example?
Okay, very good. As in the Kitty Genovese case,
Yeah.
Did you have to go down and intervene? Did you have to try to pull this attacker off her? Or could you at least call the police
Right.
and let that take care of it?
And I'll throw out, too, that she's also sort of setting up the question of, well, what about adoption?
Right.
You know, if you don't want to have the baby, at least carry it the 9 months, be a minimally good Samaritan, but then put it up for adoption. I think that that's what is in that analogy.
As well. Okay, thank you. Cassie?
I totally lost my train of thought.
Well, then I'll just have, oh, John, go ahead.
Isn't there an extent to which she's saying if the law in the country does not require us to be even minimally decent Samaritans, and how can we expect women to do it as well?
Right. Yeah.
I guess
That's exactly
I just thought
right.
that was a little bit unclear, but that's so
Yeah.
she's really kind of attacking the law in the country. So
Right.
it's just saying, look, it's inconsistent in the case of women.
Exactly.
Okay, and Cassie?
I remember Lloyd had said something earlier that to the effect that if you're being forced, if you have no choice but to be good, you're going to do it with, you know, more of a negative attitude. It's not going to be something that you want to do. But if you have the choice to do it, and you do make the choice to be the Good Samaritan, then there's more of a, I don't know, positive attitude about it.
Okay, and Rhonda?
I don't know if this is totally germane, but you know, today, as opposed to 1971, you know, a woman can test the next day to see if she's pregnant, as opposed to 1971 when you were 3 or 4 months pregnant before you knew.
And even if you don't, even if a test wouldn't say much the next day, you can take a precaution, a morning after pill.
Which is quite new, yeah.
And say, I don't know whether this happened or not, but I do know a burglar got in, and I don't want any problems.
Or rather, the window was left open and
Yeah.
there might be a burglar.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
spraying
right.
for burglars.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and pull up the next couple of graphics. And Lloyd, would you read these for us, please?
Third-party interventions. What we should ask is whether we must accede to a situation in which somebody is being compelled, by nature perhaps, to be a good Samaritan. We have, in other words, to look now at third-party interventions. I have been arguing that no person is morally required to make large sacrifices to sustain the life of another who has no right to demand them, and this even where the sacrifices do not include life itself. We are not morally required to be good Samaritans, or anyway very good Samaritans to one another.
And the next.
But what if a man cannot extricate himself from such a situation? What if he appeals to us to extricate himself? What if he appeals to us to extricate him? It seems to me plain that there are cases in which we can, cases in which a good Samaritan would extricate him.
But, and let's look at the next point.
My argument will be found unsatisfactory on 2 counts by many of those who want to regard abortion as morally permissible. First, while I do argue that abortion is not impermissible, I do not argue that it is always permissible. There may well be cases in which carrying the child to term requires only minimally decent Samaritanism of the mother, and this is a standard we must not fall below.
Okay, so now she's going to open up this standard of being a minimally decent Samaritan, and she's going to say, okay, so you were raped, and maybe if you were a good Samaritan, you'd go ahead and have that baby. But as a minimally decent Samaritan, it is acceptable for you to have an abortion, and you shouldn't feel guilty about this. But she says, you know, let's say that you're 7 months pregnant, you'd like to go on a cruise, and you'd like to look nice, so you have an abortion. And she's going to say, you know, that's something a monster would do. That's not something that we do. And so she's going to say, that's unacceptable. Phil, comments on this?
Yeah, I think that's right. And again, it's interesting that she's staking out a terrain for herself that denies the absolutes. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's not that it's always going to be something that we never allow, or that it's going to be something that you can allow with no thought whatsoever. She's saying it's, you know, there's a degree of complexity here, and that she started out with the easy ones. Oh, here, clearly you could have an abortion. Here, you could have one. Here, well, maybe not so much, but here you could. What about over here? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then she goes to the point where, you know, she's using that analogy of the Samaritan and thinking, okay, you don't have to be the best Samaritan, but like you just said, if you're 7 months pregnant and really you only want to have the abortion to go on the cruise, no, you should. She's making the argument that person, I think she's implying that person should give birth to the baby and give it up for adoption. I think that's her that's her
minimally
argument
decent
there.
standard.
I think you can take that a little bit further too, just in the fact that sometimes there has been the cases of convenience, quite often, that there was a period of time, I don't know if it's as often as it used to be, that abortion was on demand, simply because it was inconvenient. Whether or not you're going to keep the child, whether or not you're going to put them up for adoption or not, which to me is morally wrong.
So Judith Jarvis Thomson, in this piece that is prior to Roe versus Wade, then is going to say, listen, things are way too strict here. People are controlling women's bodies, and they're saying, now I'm going to tell you, Supreme Court justices, that you could have a violinist attached to you for 9 months, for 9 years. And she's going to say, and I'm also going to tell you that maybe somebody's going to take your coat, and that only one of you can live, and that you need to somehow get that coat back if you want to live. And then she's going to give some other examples, such as, the mother's health. You're going to die if you continue with this pregnancy. So she's going to start giving the justices some reasons. And when the justices came out with Roe versus Wade, they did not use any of these reasons. The only reason that they came up with is that a woman has a right to privacy right to a safe abortion the first 3 months. Secondly, a woman has a right to a safe abortion the second trimester. That it has to be done in a place where it's safe. After that, once the fetus has reached what they're going to call viability, then it is not. So they don't give any of these reasons that she's put in, but she has definitely then opened the door and said, you've got the door so closed that women are dying. Lloyd?
I think what a good point she makes here is something I get frustrated a lot is when I have discussion or arguments with people, and they're like, well, are you pro-choice, blah, blah, blah. And they have this view that I've seen it a lot where people paint people who are pro-choice as being, not only that they think it should be legal, but that people who are pro-choice all believe that abortions should be morally permissible in every situation. Everyone should be happy and getting abortions all the time and holding hands and singing songs about abortions. And that just isn't the case. Most people I know are pro-choice in a lot of ways feel that abortions are in a lot of cases are wrong, disgusting, and whatnot, but that's not their choice to make, and it should be put up to someone else.
It's the woman's choice. John, could I have you read the next 3 graphics, please?
Yeah. I'm inclined to think Oh, I'm sorry.
You're right.
Yep, okay. I'm inclined to think it a merit of my account precisely that it does not give a general yes or a general no. It allows for and supports our sense that, for example, a sick and desperately frightened 14-year-old schoolgirl pregnant due to rape may of course choose abortion, and that any law which rules this out is an insane law.
And the next?
And it also allows for and supports our sense that in other cases resort to abortion is even positively indecent. It would be indecent in the woman to request an abortion and indecent in a doctor to perform it if she is in her 7th month and wants the abortion just to avoid the nuisance of postponing a trip abroad. Secondly, while I am arguing for the permissibility of abortion in some cases, I am not arguing for the right to secure the death of the unborn child. The desire for the child's death is not one which anybody may gratify, should it turn out to be possible to detach the child alive.
Okay, so she wants it known that she doesn't want to be seen as a monster in this case. But then, Phil, she wraps this up in a rather nifty way, page 96, very last paragraph. At this place, however, it should be remembered that we have only been pretending throughout that the fetus is a human being from the moment of conception. A very early abortion, surely not the killing of a person, and so is not dealt with by anything I have said here. So, Phil, tell us a little bit about how that is. We've got 1 minute left, too.
Okay, I'll say it real quick. She actually, what she did with all the arguments that went preceding it, she said, you know what, let's assume the most extreme anti-abortion people are right, and that it's a full person at the moment of conception. Even so, under certain circumstances, clearly abortion should be permissible. But then she just, at the end, problematized even that idea. And she said, when is a person a person? There actually is not going to be a moment where you could draw a hard line and say, at 12:02, not a person, at 12:03, person. That's not going to happen.
Okay, very good. I wish we had more time to discuss. All the students have their hands up. It's one of those issues. Thanks so much for being here, Phil, and thanks to all of you. Bye-bye.